We're done. And it was a whirlwind, but just like always, the session comes to an end and we survive and we go on vacation and we recuperate and then we figure out what our next steps are. And we've been doing that a lot this week in the office, trying to figure out what we're going to, where we go from here. So we'll talk a little bit about that this evening, but I think there's some really great things to celebrate from this session. First off, we still have an independent judicial branch. They will not be saying that we have partisan elections. That is a tremendous victory and perhaps probably the most important victory of the session, especially as we enter this new era of fascism. It'd be really nice to have a judicial branch that could be independent and, protect our rights. So that's a bright spot. MEIPA is a sad story. The legislature absolutely tried to eliminate any value in that Held v. Montana youth climate case. They wrote laws to basically eliminate the value of that decision. But trust us, that's not the end of this issue. And they also tried to pass a bill. They did pass a bill, and governor signed all these bills today that said that the state can't have any air quality regulation more stringent than the federal government, which was a direct attack on the state's ability to consider greenhouse gas emissions in air permitting processes for things like the Laurel Generating Station or any kind of power plant. All of this is just one step in a long process. Just because they passed a law doesn't mean it meets our constitutional rights, that it fulfills our constitutional obligations or theirs. So we have a long way to go to push back on what the legislature has done. We feel very confident that a lot of what they did in regard to MEIPA and climate change will end up being thrown out by the courts. But that's why we're here, because somebody has to take them to court, somebody has to push back, and MEIC intends to be involved in those discussions and figuring out how do we get our rights back in a way that is meaningful. We had some losses in water quality issues. So be it, we'll talk about some of those tonight. Again, do they comply with our right to a clean, healthful environment? Do they comply with federal requirements? I think Dirk has a lot to say about that. There were surprising successes this session when it came to, PFAS or styrofoam. We found this really interesting outcome of RFK Jr. talking about the harmful effect of PFAS and things like styrofoam and plastics accumulating in the human body. And we got quite a few Republicans, enough to pass these bills, primarily younger Republicans, to vote in favor of these bills and sometimes even stand up on the floor and talk about, how much plastic we have in our bodies, how much plastic is in fetal tissue. This was something I have never seen before. So I'm really heartened by that little piece of information because it does show me that there's hope. There's hope to really address some of these problems that we face in a bipartisan way. So I think that was a bright spot. The other bright spot I see very much was the conversation we had about transmission issues. Nick passed a resolution, and Nick couldn't be here today, but I don't think. But Nick passed a resolution that had tremendous bipartisan support, talking about the importance of new transmission. There are bills that give pre-approval for transmission, bills that we opposed when they were introduced, and we helped rewrite them and to the point that we supported them, trying to get more transmission off the ground. That is, great step forward. There were so many attacks on wind energy and wind energy siting, and all of the bad bills died. None of those bills became law. The only one that did become law was a compromise bill that the wind energy industry was the siting requirements they could accept, pretty reasonable requirements. It's a good idea to have a wind siting law, in my opinion. So I was happy that we saw one pass, and the wind industry was fine with it. So I think there's a lot of bright lights that shone through this session. And a lot of that's because of the great work of not just MEIC's amazing staff, but also of our partners. I can't speak highly enough of Montana Conservation Voters Lobbyists session. I think that they were just two terrific young women who worked their tails off and had never lobbied before. Same with Audubon. Peter, though, has lobbied before, but Peter is terrific. And I think all of them have been on these calls. So we had a really nice team of conservation advocates working together all session to achieve some of these victories. And of course, there's the MREA, Northern Plains bill, that we're hoping the governor signs, that allows shared solar, basically community solar systems. For when people can't put solar on their own home, they can buy into a system in their community. So that's a huge victory. That's something that it's an idea that's been floating around for years. And here we are. We managed to get that passed in this state. And with any luck, we have a governor who will sign it. We'll see. But please continue to call the governor on House Bill 188. Or Senate Bill 188. I'm so bad at numbers. It's on our website.
It's on a slide here too.
Good. All in all, it was a hugely successful session compared to where we thought we would be. There's losses, definitely, but all in all, it could have been a hell of a lot worse. So, yay. So let's dig into losses and victories and everything else. But thank you for being there. And I can't forget this. Thank you all for being there throughout this process. It really does encourage us and give us more resolve to have you all on these calls weekly and know that we're not alone. Sometimes it does feel a little bit lonely when you're up in the Capitol, surrounded by bad people. So thank you very much for being there and for making the phone calls. So, victory, Ben?
Yeah, really exciting that on the last day of the session, we were able to see two important study resolutions pass. I can talk about the first one. Maybe Durf will want to talk about the second one. The first is this House Joint Resolution 44, and it's a study of endocrine disrupting chemicals and PFAS. And again, yes, Anne was talking about a surprising coalition was built across the parties in this session with interest in action on some of these super pervasive pollutants and microplastics gaining so much attention in our media finally. And so hopefully we can do something about this enormous problem. And so yeah, it was very exciting. The bill originally just wanted to study endocrine disrupting chemicals. We had a couple of PFAS bills this session that we would have loved to see passed that did not, but the bill sponsor was open to an amendment that would incorporate a lot of the language we had in those other bills about wanting to make a plan on PFAS. And so he allowed that to be amended in, and hopefully it will be a top priority in the interim. So that'll be something that we shift our attention to and try to lobby for some action on that. And we can hit the next session with some incremental, hopefully at minimum incremental steps, or maybe we'll see this more and more momentum and we can actually have something more substantial that we can bring to the table. So yeah, that's exciting.
Laura.
And we had House Resolution 61, which is going to hopefully result in an interim study on property insurance premiums and why they're increasing and why Montana is such a high-risk state. And that will inevitably lead to a discussion about wildfire risk. So Montana is one of the top in the nation for high exposure to wildfire risks, and that is due to increasing frequency, intensity, extreme weather events across the country are impacting our insurance rates here, and so it will not be possible for an interim study without talking about climate change. So this will be a great vehicle for doing that.
And then the next two bills Nick worked on. One is HJ12, which is a bad EV resolution. We've talked about it before. It just had all sorts of ridiculous language about EVs. That one died in committee, never got a vote in the Senate Energy Committee. And then HJ54, which is a trash incineration resolution, which anybody who has been around Montana long enough may remember the wars we had over cement kilns burning garbage. And what we learned in those fights was that trash incineration leads to all sorts of toxic substances being put into the air. And this bill died on the Senate floor. So that was a surprising victory and relief, because the last thing we want to do is have to have a big debate over whether our trash incineration laws in the Montana Clean Air Act are sufficient or should be weakened. They've been there since the early 90s when people first were concerned about burning garbage in cement plants. We don't need to retread that territory. We have a negligible risk standard for burning trash, and that's what we should keep. So that was a relief. We're happy that that one is not going to be studied this interim. So victory.
And were there any other EV bills that made it through?
You know, I don't recall if Becky Edwards' resolution made it through, but I don't think so. I think that one died as well. Or not resolution, but her bill.
Call that a victory too. Like EVs have been a huge
right.
target in the past. And so this session getting through without any more bad stuff, that's great.
Right, right. You're right.
Okay.
Sure.
The governor is considering bills fast and furiously. So we have some primetime bills for you. They are on his desk. Pretty much everything at this point is either days away or already on his desk. And he has to make a decision if he's going to veto said bill within 10 days. And some of these are potentially bills that he could veto. And so we are encouraging you to reach out on this full list of bills. I'm going to run through mine and then I'll pass it off to others. But all of these water quality related bills are on his desk now. 664 is the repeal of numeric nutrient standards without any sort of plan or regulations or anything designed to replace our numeric standards and assure that water quality is protected. That was sponsored by Representative Mercer out of Billings and is now on his desk. Unfortunately, this is the second time that we're going to have to deal with this. This bill will be subject to EPA review, although with the current state of affairs and the people who are in charge at the EPA, I think that this one is probably going to end up in court is where it's headed. But we do have the law on our side. You can't just repeal water quality standards and comply with the Water Quality Act. So that's one we're asking for a veto for. HB 587 is the material damage bill for coal mining. Under SMACRA, this is the bill that material damage is a prohibition on impacting water quality and quantity outside the permit boundary of coal mines. And this weakens that particular standard. Another bill that is the second go round. The first time we dealt with this one was in 2023, and this will be subject to review and approval by the U.S. Office of Surface Mining. And once again, we have some pretty problematic people in charge at the U.S. Office of Surface Mining. And so if this bill is implemented, then I'm guessing it will end up in litigation. And finally is HB 685. This is the bill that changes Montana's non-degradation policy. to a basically a pollution allowance, and also tweaks the economic cost benefit analysis that you are supposed to do in non-degradation review by only allowing for the benefits of pollution to be analyzed and not the costs. So that's a problem. I'm going to skip over nuclear and I'll let Ann do that. Coal washing. So if you wash your coal, you get a tax credit in Montana. It's an absolutely absurd section of the tax code that the coal mining companies have snuck in. And SB 333, it was supposed to sunset. This coal washing tax credit was supposed to sunset this year. This extends it another 2 years. In a way, this is also a victory. We killed this bill twice, and the original version of it was going to extend it indefinitely. So 2 more years, and then hopefully this tax credit will expire, but we'd rather it just be removed from the books entirely. And that's all mine. So Ann, do you want to handle nukes and wildfire and right away?
Sure. Nuclear, there's 2 bills that have just landed. One is just landed on the governor's desk. The other one is headed there, and they have to do with basically inviting in the storage of radioactive waste in Montana and uranium enrichment siting in Montana. And I just want to say that yesterday I read an article that Idaho is going to be taking waste from universities all over the country because they did something similar where they invited waste to come in. The radioactive waste bill, at least at the moment, seems to be limited to Montana nuclear waste, but that's an easy fix next session. So I think that these are a dangerous road to go down. I think Montana needs way more sideboards on this, what I see as very much a scam in the energy space right now, is which is a lot of developers or people, they're not developers, they're getting rich off the federal government funding nuclear waste or nuclear facilities. And we just fell into the trap of weakening our laws for a technology that simply doesn't exist. And in the meantime, inviting these harmful activities that could seriously harm communities into our state. So both these bills are on the governor's desk. There is no local vote allowed in either one of them anymore. So we urge you to call the governor on those. Then wildfire liability. The PSC is really upset about this bill because HB 490 is Northwestern's bill to try to eliminate its liability for wildfires. And just a quick summary, what happens is a utility goes to the Public Service Commission, which is not qualified to review wildfire mitigation plans, gives the PSC the ability to accept public comments, but not to ask any questions of the utility. The utility presents its wildfire mitigation plan to the PSC, who is not qualified, and the PSC is supposed to approve that plan. And that's going to help shift risk to the state if that wildfire mitigation plan doesn't prevent wildfires and somebody's house burns down. But it also contains provisions like a utility can't be held accountable if it does what similar utilities in the state do. Well, there is no similar utility to Northwestern. So you're comparing Northwestern's actions in mitigating wildfire risk to Northwestern. You don't get a look at the best types of utilities in the region even, and there are good utilities doing wildfire mitigation. But Northwestern doesn't have to be compared to them if its actions result in a wildfire. It is a terrible bill. I am appalled that so many Democrats didn't bother to read it. And it is a bill that should be vetoed by the governor because the people of this state are the ones who are going to end up losing, and our utilities are the ones who are going to end up washing their hands of problems that they could have prevented, the harm that they could have prevented from wildfires. So call the governor if you have any ability to do so, because this is a terrible bill. But it was big, it was complicated, it was amended a million times, so everyone figured it was fixed. It wasn't fixed, plain and simple. HB 122. This one gives natural gas pipelines by right the ability to locate in the right of way. This bill almost died in the Senate. It was a 27-23 vote, super disappointing, which meant it was a bipartisan vote. But as we know, the last thing we need to do is encourage more and easier access for natural gas pipelines. Pipelines leak, end of story. Pipelines leak, that's what happens. And we're going to be putting these by right into our rights of way, where there's a lot of vehicles and people could be exposed to the dangers of a leaking pipeline. So another disappointment, super close on that one. Nick worked very hard on it and came close to killing it, but it's on the governor's desk. So now let's go to what we supported. Ben.
I'm so excited about House Bill 477, and I'm also in a little knot of anxiety about it because I'm just fearful it'll be vetoed now that it's in its final phase. And it's a really exciting bill. You know, you've heard me talk about it before, but it feels to me like a bill that accomplishes multiple things and is a win across several sectors. It helps our human health. If we're eating food out of styrofoam, we're leaching horrid chemicals into our bodies. It removes a bunch of litter off of the landscape, helps out our landfills, which are getting clogged by single-use plastics, and it promotes industries in Montana versus shipping from China single-use plastics. So there's a potential sort of nascent industry in Montana of compostable manufacturing and distribution, and also industrial composting happening. And of course, we have such a huge agricultural industry as well, and there's opportunity there for byproducts from ag to be sold into these compostables. So it's just super exciting. And so giving it a strong push at the very end here will be really helpful. I'm dropping in, again, the governor's contact information and then also the lieutenant governor's contact information. The rumor is that she's reviewing the bill tomorrow and will make recommendations to Governor Gianforte. So if we can put a little pressure on her as well and say, hey, what a great idea this is, that could be really helpful. So keep your fingers crossed, and even better, please make a phone call or send an email and say, this is an awesome idea. And it's a soft touch for businesses. It's a 3 years before anything even happens. It's really like, hey, get ready. We're making this change, Bill. If there's hardship on a business, they can apply with the DEQ for an exemption, and that's pretty low bar. So it's really to guide us in a much better direction without harming any of our local businesses, small businesses. And it's got a lot of small business support. So there's my long pitch. Thanks.
And the next bill, SB 188, is the shared solar bill. This bill still hasn't been signed by the speaker, so it's awaiting the speaker to sign off on it, and then it will go to the governor. And you've heard a lot about it all session. It would be a great victory if it became law, so please call the governor. It is a way for communities to kind of pitch in and create a solar project and benefit from the power, as opposed to having to put solar panels on their people's homes when they may not be able to do so. So great bill, please call the governor. But we have a little bit of time on that one. And then I'm going to pass it off to Laura.
Thank you. We had 2 great bills for transportation and increasing transportation options and making communities more livable, walkable, equitable paths. I think these 2 represent the beginning of a series of important conversations that I hope we engage in about how we build our cities and how we prioritize transportation and access, and how we can make our communities more human-centric rather than car-centric. So the conversation around parking reform that House Bill 492 prompted was very interesting. Do we want to prioritize creating space for cars over businesses, housing, more efficient land use? So this one reduces the minimum requirements that a city can impose on a development for housing. So there's a lot of evidence that we've required too much parking at this point. So this doesn't limit the amount of parking that a developer can include, but cities can't require more than a set number of spaces. And that's ultimately going to be a good thing for moving forward and making better decisions about how we build our communities. House Bill 764 increases the ability of communities to expand transportation districts. So currently the burden is on residents to petition for a transportation district or expanding a transportation district. It's a little onerous. This bill creates the ability for county commissioners to initiate that process, which wasn't possible before. So that is going to be really beneficial to communities, especially rural communities, communities that are kind of on the outskirts that are not receiving that access to quote unquote alternative transportation options that could really benefit from it. So these are two really great bills. Please call the governors to support them.
Great. So before we move on to what's next, does anyone have questions about any of these bills or the process at the end of the session here? Please feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. As always, we'll have time at the end of the call for questions as well, but we're about to shift gears a little bit.
And we're all busy writing our down to earth articles. If you don't get it, it's our newsletter, our quarterly newsletter. And it's gonna have a big rundown of everything we dealt with during the session. So
So this Gary Matson, what how long does the speaker have before he needs to sign SB 188, and what can he not sign it?
he is required to sign it. I don't know if he has a time limit per se. This actually happened a couple 4 or 5 sessions ago when Austin Knudsen was the Speaker of the House, and he left town without signing a number of bills as Speaker. And it was like 2 weeks before he finally got back to Helena, signed them, and then they were transmitted to the governor. Anything that's passed, I can't see them not sign it. It's going to be signed and transmitted. It's just there may be a delay.
Yes, thanks, Durf.
Yeah.